All right. All right. Hey, welcome everybody to week 6. This is the third interview that we had so far, and excited to have with us today Sangeeta Badal. And Sangeeta is a good friend of mine. I've had the opportunity to work with her on a project at Gallup a few years back, and she's been doing some amazing work at Gallup. In fact, this week you're going to be taking the EP10, the Entrepreneurship Profile Instrument. That's part of your assignments for the week, and this woman created it. She did the research on it. We'll kind of find out how her talent themes contributed to some of the aspects that she really enjoys about working on projects like this in our interview today. But I'm just excited to be able to have a conversation with you, Sangeeta, and welcome to BSAD 111. And these are our online students. And so I've mentioned before, not all of them are, but a few of them are athletes, and that's the reason that they can't be in the in-person class. And they've all got competition. All right. And so Sangeeta has competition number 1 in her top 5. And so Sangeeta, why don't you share what your top 5 are? And then tell us a little bit about how your themes, even though, again, we've talked about this before, everybody that I've interviewed, none of us had the privilege or the aspect of knowing what our top 5 were when we were in college, because it was way before it was created. Sangeeta also got to participate in the research and development of the StrengthsFinder instrument as well, so she contributed to that. And then also a little bit more of the background, she also played a big role in creating the Gallup Purdue Index. So kind of putting those items together and creating a survey that you guys have participated in yourself, and then as well you interviewed somebody that loved their job. Remember, that was an assignment that you had just a couple of weeks ago. So so pretty much every bit of research that you've been exposed to from Gallup during your course over the last 6 weeks, she's been a part of it. So we really wouldn't have this class without Sangeeta. Okay, so Sangeeta, tell us what your 5 StrengthsFinder themes are, and then as well, help us think about how you started to recognize, even in your undergrad, how those themes were kind of playing out. You told some cool stories in our online or in our in-person lecture, and I'd love for you to kind of touch on those with our online students.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. It is wonderful to be here, to be talking to your students. Mm-hmm. My top 5 are competition maximizer, strategic learner, and achiever. And one thing that I remember from a very young age is that I always gravitated towards things that I was good at, naturally good at. Like, I would take myself away if I wasn't performing among the best in a particular group, mm-hmm. whether that was extracurricular or whether that was on the academic side. And so I would, and so when I did see when I was introduced to the strengths philosophy after joining Gallup, mm-hmm. and took the StrengthsFinder and got my report, and the whole culture in Gallup around how can you be the best that you can be, mm-hmm. working on your strengths and leveraging your strengths, it wasn't surprising to me. It wasn't surprising to me that people who go towards areas that they're good at, naturally inclined to do, you would do better if you stuck with that. You would do better if you developed those. And so I had been following that without having the whole Gallup piece,
right.
on it.
Words to describe that, right?
So I was perfectly at home in that environment. What happened as a result of following that philosophy, if you want to call it, all my life, is that I may have lost on certain opportunities because I moved away too quickly if I didn't see success in a particular area, whether a subject that I took and I didn't get a straight A in that, despite putting effort, I would change that because I thought, this is not for me. Any activity that I may have left because I felt like I didn't soar to the top very quickly, so this isn't for me. So that I may have missed out on those opportunities. The other side of this also is that when you have themes like competition and maximizer, um, the desire to be among the best, performing at that level, if there is a failure, which there is, if there is a hurdle in the way, if you don't achieve that position, the downside of that is hard to take. And I think I spent way in my growing up years. I spent a lot of energy. There's a lot of emotional energy that is wasted when you are feeling down on yourself because you couldn't make it to the top of a particular group or of a competition or a activity that you are engaged in. And so it's a double-edged sword. It helps you, it propels you towards success, but it can also, your themes or strengths can also be hard to deal with.
Right, and so I'm kind of weaving in some of the things that you shared in the other format over in the lecture hall. But one of the things that I kind of heard as a theme that I also suggested to our other students was that it's probably wise to have some kind of mechanism that kind of resets you. So if you have a loss, for instance, if it's competition and boom, you had a big loss, because the nature of competition is that sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. That's kind of the beauty of it, is that even when you lose, typically once you've bounced back from it, it makes you even more motivated than ever to win the next time, right? So we'll leverage that. We'll leverage competition when we win and when we lose, because we get a lot of emotional energy from winning as well. But there's probably that point at which you need to have a reset where either you have a friend or somebody that you can go to and say, okay, I have dwelt on this failure enough. And it's not even necessarily a failure. It's just, you go out, sometimes you win a tennis match, sometimes you lose. Sometimes, your golf score puts you in the top 5 and sometimes it doesn't. And but having somebody, maybe some body in your life that you can help do a reset, and this can be other themes as well, because I think about I've got this activator piece and constantly trying to start things, and when it doesn't go like I think it should go in terms of something that I'm initiating or starting, or it starts to drag out too long, I might be pouring way more emotional energy into that than I should be, when I could have somebody that I know that cares about me come to me and go, Mark, this is when you're letting that activator get out of control, and you need a reset. And so having those folks in your life, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Sangeeta has some more things to say about the mentorship piece and some ways to think about mentoring. But I thought that was one of those that is probably a pretty powerful takeaway for you guys to be thinking about. Everybody in the class has gone through the Gallup-Purdue Index themselves. They've scored themselves on the items. And then did some reflection questions on it. They went out and interviewed somebody that they had, in their mind, had determined loved their job. And so they got to get that feedback and be thinking about that, answer some questions, and tried to get some insights out of some of the responses that they got from the person that they interviewed. So they're familiar with the items. And so I wanted to ask Sangeeta some of the ones that you guys have asked yourself and others, and just get her feedback on it, and then also think about how that plays out, how it plays out in a more in-depth role in terms of her work at Gallup. So I'll start with the first one, and this is the one that we've always talked about as being the most controversial, and it's the best friend question. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree, do you have a best friend at work?
I do.
I do. So is that a 5?
It's absolutely a 5.
Absolutely a 5. That's awesome. And tell us a little bit about how that allows you to be more productive, how it allows you to be more engaged in your work, Sangeeta. Give us a little bit of insight into that best friend piece for you.
Sure. I see 2 sides to the best friend piece for me. One is having these close relationships allows one to have a safe psychological space in which you can share things. A lot happens in a work environment. Not everything goes your way. There are changes that happen, and the employee has to adjust to them. Having a social network or relationships that are pretty close allows you to once in a while blow up your fuse and still maintain your focus on being a productive employee. It provides you a support system that you need. The other side of a best friend for me, which has been really useful, is that I have been very fortunate to work with people who are experts in what they do. They're very intelligent, very accomplished in what they do. And so when you have strong personal relationships, you can leverage those relationships to get your own work also be done at a very high level and accomplish your goals. So if, for instance, I am stuck in a particular statistical analysis, which is part of my job, everyday job, and it is easier for me to walk across the hall or go to the next room where my friend is, who I know is much more accomplished at stats than I am, and asking him or her, I'm stuck here, could you please help me? And having those relationships has really, really helped me learn and grow in my own profession, as well as it helps me get my work done. And so you can go and have lunch and discuss all kinds of personal and professional issues, but then you can also work together and get things done. And I think having that friendship, having that close relationship helps in both aspects.
That's great. I think, for our students at their age, they're young. All of them are, for the most part, I think, are traditional age freshmen. So we're talking 19, 20, or 18, 19, 20 maybe, young. And I think, we probably have at that age, I know I had a very distinct impression about what friend meant. And so now to start to expand that and to start to think about friends are those people, not only friends, the people that you just hang out with and watch a movie with or, socialize with in your spare time, but they're also people that help you get your work done. And so starting to broaden and think about friendships and what a friend can mean to you in a work setting is probably a great thing for you guys to be thinking about, great thing for you to be thinking about in terms of how you leverage your strengths to do that. So how do you initiate those relationships? How do you figure out if this is a person that, I have the potential to connect with both on a social and friendship level and as well on a professional level, and how to be able to leverage that. So I think that's really powerful. Let's see. We also ask the mission and purpose question. So the mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important on a 1 to 5 scale.
I think it's a 6.
All right, she's off the charts on that one. Tell us a little bit about that for yourself. And
it was really easy because Gallup has this underlying philosophy and mission to really help individuals be more productive, make a difference in our society, in the lives of people that we touch, whether it is through World Poll, which is an interview of people across the world in about 190 countries. We've covered 80% or 90% of the world population, asking them about their lives, their well-being, their social, political, economic situation. So whether it is projects like that touch humanity on a global scale, or it is working in trying to understand the talents of an individual and placing those individuals in the right fit in a particular job, and then developing them using StrengthsFinder, just as we are discussing our strengths here today. It's all about building that human potential, or about workplaces. What makes a workplace really a good workplace? What are some of the drivers of having an engaged environment? Because you then are more productive. The business ultimately is more profitable because of more engaged employees, etc. So no matter what aspect that I worked on in Gallup, it was very easy to get behind that mission of making a difference in the lives of the individual. And so it's easy for me then to say that it's a 5 or a 6.
Yep. Okay, great. And I do want to take this opportunity. I didn't give as much of that information in the setup, but obviously, Sangeeta is probably not from the U.S. Originally, and in fact grew up in India. And so when we think about her, and then as well her field of study, so you might be making some guesses. Obviously, I've quoted the business leader interview series, but she has a pretty interesting background in terms of her education. So it's anthropology and human. I was going to get it. Human geography. And so I think we probably, when we hear geography, all of a sudden we're thinking about maps. And those maps, there are maps, but those maps are very specific in terms of information that they give us about humanity that are represented in those maps. So there's a sociology piece to that, I guess, if I would to say it in a broad sense.
Yes.
And so think about those two things. And I think about the international background that Sangeeta has, and as well her field of study. And then think about the mission piece and how that fits within how she began to, connect with many of the things that Gallup really had a desire to study and to quantify and to understand better. And she mentioned the world pole, which is kind of a classic example of that, of how those things all fit together. But that, you had an interesting path because you shared with us in the course or in the previous interview, you shared with us that that being able to answer 5 on the opportunity to do what I do best question was not something that you necessarily would have been able to hit as you initially started with Gallup 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about that because I thought that was really interesting, the evolution of that towards being able to do more of what you do best.
Yeah. It sure has been a journey with lots of twists and turns. So
Mm-hmm.
when I got my PhD, I think I was all set to enter academia. That's what I wanted to do. And I right off the bat, as I finished grad school, got a position at Miami of Ohio. And I thought that was it. I had the perfect positioning. I taught the classes that I really wanted to teach. I was making use of all the training that I had been given, and I was very, very passionate about it. Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes in life, things don't work out exactly as you expect, and so...
Life happens, right?
Life happens.
I'm used to that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I had to resign from that role and then started looking for another job. Family reasons, and I had to move out of Ohio and come back to Nebraska. And then I was without a job and I was looking for one. I had a pretty good set of statistical background, doing a PhD in a social science program. You pick up a lot of tools that you learn along as you go through the school process. And so that got me a job in Gallup. However, the things that I got involved in, one, were not from my background. I have never been a psychology student. I have been an anthropologist with human geography. And so for me to now be surrounded by some really, really smart researchers, but all of them were PhDs in psychology, was a big change. So there was not only a learning curve, which I loved, but I wasn't really in the area that completely engaged me, and I could experience that state of flow that I used to when I was in doing more around the areas that I had specialized in, which is economic development. And so I worked in that. I learned every day, which is what kept me engaged in that.
Learner in her
role.
top 5,
Yep.
right? Number 4.
Yeah, so that kept me engaged. But I constantly was looking for the right fit. I was looking for opportunities that would allow me to be closer to what I really, really liked. And so whether it was working on the world pole in its initial stages of development, whether it was working on StrengthsFinder, I sought out these opportunities. I've worked literally in every practice area that Gallup has to offer. And I went out searching for those opportunities because I really wanted to figure out what is it that I would really like to do, which would hold my passion and interest and engagement in the role. And I think I'm 100% sure, had I not gone through that route, I would not have been able to work now on developing something in the entrepreneurship and job creation area, which is my original area of expertise, which was economic development. But learning the psychological piece behind it was all due to my training in Gallup. And then I literally married those two. The economic development merged with the psychological underpinnings of entrepreneurship to come up with something like this. And now I can say that I think I can give 10, not 6 or 7 out of 5, because I absolutely love what I do every minute of the day. But that isn't how it started. So my suggestion would be to a lot of us don't find um, the right job which is perfect for us, which holds our interest and we are passionate about right
Yeah.
away.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are people who do find it, but then for whatever reason life takes them in another direction. So always be looking for opportunities to try different things, whether within that company or if you have to move out, that's fine too. Many of you will. um, it's worth it to be able to give a 5 to that question. So always keep that in mind as you are now starting your journey towards an employed world.
That's great. And there's one other piece that I wanted to draw out of this, and then I'm going to try to connect it with something else that I thought was really insightful that you shared earlier. And so I want to talk about this advocacy piece. And so part of what Sangeeta talked about just now was self-advocacy. And so a lot of that has to do with really understanding your strengths, knowing how you can promote yourself, knowing how you can recognize an opportunity within an organization. Because, the reality is probably, only 1% out of everybody coming out of college finds a dream job. That just doesn't happen. You start out in a role and you work your way towards a role that fits you better. Mm-hmm. But you heard, there's hope here because you heard Sangeeta share that because she was really good at this self-advocacy piece and she recognized opportunities that fit her strengths and her interests and things that energized her, and then she somehow got herself into the work. She either leveraged herself in and she got just a small piece of it, but eventually she leveraged that into bigger pieces. And I think it was, what's important with that is that self-advocacy piece. She was the one that was willing to go in and step in and say, I'd like to work on this, even if it's just the statistical analysis side. If it gets me involved in some of these projects that I'm really energized about, then I want to be a part of it. So remember that self-advocacy piece and figure out how you can really pitch yourself based on the strengths that you have. I'm always going to lead with, I love to start things. How can I help you start something? How can I contribute that talent to this? So that would be me. And then in addition to that, I want to reference something that we spoke about earlier, and that was in the live lecture section, was that Sangeeta also talked about the mentorship piece. So I'm jumping now to Gallup-Purdue Index, and I wanted to reference that before we finish up. And you'd mentioned that along the way there had been those folks that not only probably played a mentor-type role for you, but if we want to expand the idea of what mentorship means, is that these people liked you well enough and cared about you enough to want to advocate for you. And so describe that. I think it was a cross-department piece, or share a little bit about that.
I was really fortunate to be in a department where not only did we have academically rigorous environment, and we had some of the best professors, very qualified, experts in what they did, and very, very high level intellectuals, but they also were equally good human beings. And so there was this environment in the department here at UNL where the professors really cared about the students, to the extent where when I came into the program and I expressed interest, as well as they could see from my background that economic development is something that I really am passionate about, and I would like to follow that through, make my thesis topic around that area. We didn't have direct experts in the department that could very easily address that. We had people who knew about the area and were working in the area, but not enough of them. And so I think they very easily allowed me, in fact encouraged me, found opportunities where I could go and work with a professor in sociology, work with a professor in economics, work with a professor in anthropology, so that I could get what I needed, even though the department wasn't set up in its current structure to provide that. And I think that led to so much development that happened personally for me. I learned a huge amount. I also learned to take this multidisciplinary exposure that I was getting, and that not only taught me a lot, but also made me think about the world in a more complex, holistic way, rather than uh, in-depth understanding of a particular discipline. And so having those opportunities, having professors who cared, who understood what I wanted, who cared enough to follow through that, and opened up doors for me, which of course I'm the one who had to walk through those doors, but they did show me in many instances, here is an option, would you like to make use of that? Talk to another professor and said, I have a student who is interested in doing XYZ, would you take her as a special study course that you would offer to her? And that really was one of the reasons why I really say that the 4 years that I had in my PhD program at UNL were some of the best years of my life.
Yeah, that's exciting. Okay, so just to finish up then, think about that in terms of how you kind of frame up your idea or your concept of mentorship. That was one of those ones that we've been throwing out, but I think it's kind of hard. I would have thought it was pretty difficult for me to conceptualize that when I was your age. And so here's one aspect that you can think about in terms of mentorship, and that is somebody that can be an advocate for you. So they might not mentor you in a bunch of other ways. They might not be giving you great advice. They might not have a whole lot of knowledge or expertise in the particular area that you want to study, but you recognize that if they can't offer those things, they might be able to offer this one piece of opening doors for me and being an advocate for me. And that might be enough. You might have several mentors and they cover different areas, and you have one that can be this advocate for you. So that'll be the thought that we leave with you as we finish up. And I want to thank Sangeeta again for participating in our little interview exercise here. And I want to hope that you guys have a great week. And I'll get this posted as soon as I can, but I appreciate, I'm looking forward to seeing some of the comments that you have on our discussion boards this week regarding our interview with Sangeeta. And we'll talk to you soon. Have a great week.
Thank you.